Welcome to Central St Martin's and to our Lethaby gallery. Can we get a quick show of hands? Who's here from CSM, from Central St Martin's? Brilliant. Who is from the wider UAL community? A few, brilliant. And who's here from outside of UAL? Welcome, great to see you. Okay, well, my name's Kate Pellin. I'm a cultural programmer here at CSM. I'm one of the co-curators of this exhibition, the Observatory, which is our yearly LDF, London Design Festival exhibition. We show fantastic work by recent graduates and also by members of staff. And Lucy Kimbell's project is featured in this show, which is why we're so pleased that Lucy's here to chair a panel discussion around design in 2040. As it happens, one of our designers, Eve, is working here tonight. Eve created the visual identity for our show, which you can see up on the screens and around the place, so it's brilliant to have Eve here as well. A tiny bit of housekeeping. If the fire alarm goes, it's real, so please calmly make your way out to Granary Square. There are loos just through these doors, and you'll be shown if you need them. If everyone can hear, that's great. If you haven't got a perfect sight line, you could also relocate. There are a few spare chairs still. And if we do have any latecomers who come in, please just wave your hand and help them find a seat. We've got lots of events for the show. We've got a fantastic event actually tomorrow night with the Design Against Crime Research Centre, and Lorraine from the centre is here. So I do encourage you, if you enjoy this evening, which you will, come back tomorrow night for that. And then next week, we've got some final events which are put on by our students and our alumni. So please come and support them. Hi, Shannon. Over to you.
Okay, thank you. This one? Okay. Hello, and thank you for coming. My name's Lucy Kimbell. I'm Professor of Contemporary Design Practices here at Central St Martin's, and I convene the Policy Future Studio. So thank you, Kate, and the curators of the show and helping us, and CSM Events for putting this event on tonight. Tonight we're going to explore futures for design as a profession, as a practice, with a lens on the year 2040 and a lens on the UK, recognising that the UK is already sort of globally implicated in all sorts of networks. We're going to be thinking about how professional design work might be organised, how it might be delivered, how it's valued, what kind of operational and business models it might involve, and what kind of skills and approaches might be needed by the people doing designing who, along with automated entities and people who don't think of themselves as designers, are involved in designing. So we're going to be thinking about 2040, which is 16 years ahead. But let's start by looking 16 years back to October 2008. Some of you were probably quite young then. Let's just remember what that might be have been like. So the global financial crisis that started in about 2007 was still unfolding in 2008 with a massive bailout of public money, bailing out banks, which continued through quantitative easing. So large amounts of public money to save the financial sector. In the UK, the Prime Minister was Gordon Brown. The US was preparing for its presidential election, which was won by a senator from Chicago, Barack Obama. In the Harvard Business Review in 2008, they published an article earlier that year by the chief executive of a significant design firm, IDEO, introducing to broad attention the term design thinking. Also in 2008, there were 385 parts per million of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, which today is 421 parts per million. In 2008, Twitter had about 300,000 tweets a day. It's now about 500 million a day. And by the end of 2008, the iPhone 3G was the biggest selling smartphone in the US. So that's 2008, that's 16 years ago. So what's happened since then? Well, we know climate scientists report an acceleration of human-created climate change and species and habitat loss, alongside national and global organisational commitments to do something about it. China has become recognized as a global superpower. It's now the second largest economy in the world behind the US. There's been a huge technological proliferation. So the smartphones that I already mentioned in 2008 were still relatively new. There's expected to be sales of 1.23 billion smartphones this year. We now have things like big data, the cloud, distributed ledger, crypto, automation, robotics, artificial and general intelligence, genetic technologies. All of these things have been developing intensively in the last 16 years. The COVID pandemic killed 7 million people. In the UK, since 2008, we've had all sorts of things happen, but including years of austerity. The Brexit vote, then we left the EU, lots of prime ministers. There's been growing visibility of discussions around social justice, including Black Lives Matter, the Black Lives Matter movement, Indigenous peoples movements globally, and ideas of reparation and decolonisation more visible than 16 years ago, but alongside a continued lack of justice, for example, about access to resources such as healthcare. In 2023, the House of Commons Women and Equalities Committee, which was looking at maternal deaths in this country, in this rich country, they found that Black women were 3.7 times more likely to die than white women, and Asian women were 1.8 times more likely to die with white women when they were having babies. So that was from 2022, that data. And with these new phenomena, and also old phenomena, we have new concepts to make sense of them. Fake news, surveillance capitalism, the politics of grievance. So a lot of that's quite geopolitical. We're not mostly going to be talking about geopolitics today. We're going to be talking about design. But there's at least two reasons to mention some of these geopolitical factors, because firstly, they're quite often easier to remember. Maybe you can remember where you were when Barack Obama became president, or when you heard that the Grenfell Tower had gone up in flames. Maybe you remember those things. And the second reason for remembering these broader geopolitical events is that they shape, possibly determine, possibly react to the forms of design in which many of the people here tonight work, study, are passionate about. They shape what is possible in design work and what is desirable in design work and what is not possible. So what we're going to do tonight is look ahead, remembering the past and the present. And we have 4 companions on this journey who bring varied experience and expertise to bear on the questions I raised earlier. So starting over here, we have Liz Ebengo, who originally studied law and who then was at Central St Martin's here studying MA Material Futures and still teaches and is involved in various ways at Central St Martin's. But mostly works in the humanitarian context, doing post-conflict work, bringing innovation practices into that kind of humanitarian work. To my right, we have Julian Thompson, founder and director of design strategy and practice at Rooted by Design, which is a collective of about 10 people and a wider network working with communities. And whose background is not in design, but actually did an MA in policy and spent time working with civil society organisations, but has come to design from working in that sector. On my left, we have Clare Farrell, a textiles designer and occasional lecturer here at Central St Martin's short courses, an activist, a co-founder of Extinction Rebellion, and now a co-founder of the Humanity Project. And then on the left-hand side, Kieran McBride, designer, head of public sector design and policy labs at Frog Design. And Frog Design was originally an independent German design consultancy that now is international and was acquired by Capgemini, so a big IT and technology services company in 2021. And Kieran has a background in digital and service design. So these are our companions who we're going to go through thinking about the future together. I have some questions for them, and then will be a chance for all of you to ask questions and share perspectives. But we're going to start by trying to get into that future, into 2040. And we're going to do this by watching 3 short films. They're all about 2 minutes each. Created by filmmaker and UAL colleague Adam Razvi. I don't know if you're here, Adam. I saw your name on the list, not here at the moment. And I want to acknowledge Adam and the great team that I worked with between February and July this year, with 6 graduates, including Liz and some of the others who are here, who brought to life, in the form of pop-up installations, 3 different versions of 2040, 3 different versions of professional design practice, what a studio might be like in 2040, that 60 people visited back in May when we held it here. So we've now got short films of these pop-up installations which bring to life 3 different possible futures. And I just want to thank and acknowledge the graduates that I worked with, Dirk Ringers and Isaiah Thierry, Ellen Cahill and Daniel Jimenez Prieto, Liz Ebengo and B. Yogasifam. So we'll watch the 3 films and then we'll be a bit more in 2040 and move on to the questions. Thanks, Kate. Okay, that's 3 different scenarios for 2040 with different roles and institutionalizations of design. Hopefully that got you a bit into the future, 16 years away. I'm going to ask you all to just spend 1 minute thinking about yourself in October 2040. How old will you be? Where do you think you'll be living? What sort of things do you think you'll be doing for work? Who do you think you'll be doing them with? So I've pre-asked that question to our speakers. I think I might start with you, Claire. So can you tell us, it's October, take that one. Is it gonna?
Sounds like it's working to me.
Okay. So it's October 2040. How old are you going to be? Where will you be living, do you think? What will you be doing?
If I'm alive, which is slightly unlikely in my view, for a multitude of different reasons, I'll be 57, going on 58. If anything that looks like the market economy still exists and we still have to earn wages in any way that's similar to today, obviously I'll still be working because the retirement age by then will have gone up to about 90. If I'm successful in what I'm doing at the moment, then, what I will be trying to still work on is ways for people to continually improve their own lives and to continually be able to create agency and wrestle with things that need dealing with. That said, that's what I would like to imagine if I thought that there was a possibility that I could still be doing what I'm doing now. In reality, I think that the world will be a complete shit show. There won't be an Arctic. Sea level rise will have accelerated massively. Geopolitics will have not only shifted but become very, very unstable forever. And who knows what capitalism or any kind of market will look like because of the material reality that we're in, the technological reality that we're hurtling into at like very great speed, and the information system that we have at the moment being so absolutely fucked and not looking unfuckable to anyone that I've ever met who's an expert in any of the digital kind of world or the media or anything. I think really, for me, a lot of the work that I'm doing at the moment, which is about relational work, about dynamics of getting people to talk to one another face to face, it feels like we're moving towards a future where not only are people going to have to deal with things in their locality because a lot of systems are going to break down and people are going to have to learn to work together to meet the needs of people who are around them. There's also, going to be a necessity of talking face to face with people, because I really think that the only way you can understand the world that we're moving into feels clear to me. It's going to be through talking to people in real life, because you won't know whether anything you look at on a screen is real. You won't know whether anything that's been written was written by a person. You won't be able to tell whether a video is really a person or a made-up thing. You won't be able to listen to a podcast and know whether it was a person speaking or whether it's been made by a machine. Someone said to me the other day, at least, I can't remember what he said, like 20% of the children that are born today are born because of an algorithm that matched their parents. If you go back in time and tell someone that's the reality in 2024, people say, no, it won't be, that's fucking horrific. But that is already what we live with. And most of those apps are owned by the same company. So it doesn't look very good. And I find it really challenging to sort of invite people to look that far into the future, when I think it's going to already have broken down all of our food systems, potentially broken down any possibility of any geopolitical stability, which we're obviously living in the midst of, a very rapid unfolding of that supposed stable thing that we've all lived with in Europe and the West, looking like it's only going in one direction, and no one has a fucking clue what to do about it.
Thank you. Liz, can we have you next? Oh, thank you. So how old will you be in October 2040? What will you be doing, and who will you be doing it with, do you think?
I'm going to be 43 years old in 2040, so still quite young. If I'm still in my field of work, which is humanitarian innovation, I think there's a constant about my job. I will still be able to do my job because human beings are terrible. We know how to make wars. We know how to tear communities down. And so I will still have a job. And I think my job will be very important because it will be in the stage of rebuilding. In my 2040, I think there will be unity because of collective trauma. And that's an amazing place to work. And we, as a humanitarian innovator, someone who works in that sector, you have to see the joy in really dark things. And so I think that 2040, I'll be working with people who have a little bit of optimism, who can do the work with joy and courage and boldness. So that is my 2040. I think that's what I'm going to be doing.
Thank you. Can you pass the mic to Julian?
So I'll be just a little bit older than you, Liz. I'll be 56. Gosh, that's maybe feeling a bit older. But so currently the work that we do sits very much in the kind of design consultancy, public civil society space. So we're often working on critical issues that are affecting disproportionately Black, African and Caribbean communities. Black maternal health is one of those things. I don't think I'll be in the UK, so I actually see myself back in the Caribbean or on the Africa continent somewhere, potentially in Ghana. And I can kind of see myself doing work which is around what I'm going to call like design contestation, or supporting particular groups, create scenarios, visions, designs that contest what we might see as a determined future that has been set by politicians and those in the powers that be, and think about how people, communities, specifically those in the South, can begin to resist that and begin to come up with new alternatives for the way the world works. I see myself doing a lot of work in what, I kind of envisioned more institutions. So I'd like to see in the next 16 years more institutions, more vehicles of change that are more diverse than there are currently. So hopefully there are more organisations, like you've just said, Liz, doing amazing work around joy and repair, collective visioning, but also finding alternatives to the way that we live, the way that we do life. I can also see myself doing a lot of work around trust, because I think so much trust would have been broken and lost over the years in many ways, and probably trying to do more work around how do we rebuild and recreate new social contracts with ourselves as communities and people, but also with government as well. So yeah, I see myself filling a lot of pies, probably trying to be as agile as I can be in the work that I do. I don't think design will probably look the same as well. I'll obviously get a bit more into that. But hopefully it's something that's a bit more distributed and a bit more ambitious as well.
Okay, Kieran, how old will you be in 2014? What will you be doing?
Suddenly I'll be 58. And if I am able to retire, which is, yes, kind of a utopian dream from what you've just said, Claire, but yeah, I fully agree. Then maybe be in the UK, not because of the state of the UK over the last few years, because it's actually not become a great place to be with the breakdown of infrastructure in the last 14 years of government, but maybe in the Scottish Highlands where you can have community and you have got wind power and you can actually work with the things that are good about the UK. But I don't think that will be true. So much like other panelists, I think I might be doing a lot of what I'm currently doing, because my current role is, for me, design is essentially a decision-making framework. I don't work in UI design. I don't actually work in delivery of design assets. And as a decision-making framework, I try to work to create more equity in those decisions in government. So right now, there's lots of assumptive policy making. Obviously, it's hugely biased in terms of the people making the decisions, in terms of their education, in terms of the kind of the demographics. So really my role currently, and you have to think about a completely destabilized geopolitical situation. The only way to fix that, because I used to work in the private sector quite a lot, but the only way to fix that is to create more equilibrium between the private markets and the state. And the state, it's wildly out of balance right now. And the markets are the ones that are driving capitalism. I'm sure we'll go into more talking about capitalism in these systems. And the value-based system, which is completely skewed at the moment. So yeah, my role is to create more equity in the decision-making process at the point of policy. How does policy help individual society? So bioengineering came up on one of the videos earlier. So it's a fascinating space. No one really knows what bioengineering is. It's like pollutant-eating microbes, or it's mRNA vaccines, or kind of synthetic meat, synthetic protein. So we have in my company a actual bioengineering lab. But how does the government kind of legislate, regulate, help markets understand what the effect of these wildly changing technologies are? The first point is policy. So if you don't create policy and you don't understand what these technologies are going to do, you don't have a holistic view, and you don't talk to the people it's going to affect, how synthetic meat's going to affect upland farmers, therefore what's your land management policy? How does mRNA vaccine continuing to be rolled out when you have conspiracy theories and people on Reddit telling you that everyone's getting chipped? How do you protect the world when you have this misinformation through essentially people just making up stuff and telling you whatever they want, and you end up with kind of, I won't go into politics, but what's happening in the US right now. You say a thing and it's true, or you see a thing and it's true. So yeah, that's where I hope to be, because I love my work, but it's not an easy thing to change.
Okay, so let's go a bit more into design, right? Which I suppose most people here who have come to this talk tonight have an interest in design necessarily. But you said, I think said this, Julian, like the thing that we call design might have changed by then. And I've already sort of set up the idea that the thing that we call design now has already got some conditions which design historians and critical thinkers help us see. So what might design look like? What when you use that term, you might not call it design. What do you think you'll be doing, and how is it valued? Who's valuing it? And then who's actually paying for it? How are you making a living from that thing that you currently call design, if that's what you're doing? Do you want to start with that?
Yeah, I actually think design's a great industry to be in. I think in the years to come, there is going to be a need for what I'm going to just define as people's problem solvers, those that want to think differently and support others think differently about how we solve, engage, understand, diagnose, reframe problems in order to create better solutions and better futures. So I think it's still going to be there. There is an academic called George Camacho, and he talks about designers building a new level of new political sensibility. So I think there's something about designers being able to navigate the politics of design and the challenges that will come from competing agendas in the different spaces that we're in. The spaces that I'm currently in already, there are multiple agendas, multiple things we're pushing against, exploring how we can overcome. I think those will heighten. I think when we look at those scenarios, all of those scenarios talked about, the wealth inequality and the wealth gap kind of growing. So I think there's going to be a need for designers to engage more critically in the politics of design. I also think there's something about being able to ask really good questions and still being able to frame really simply, like, what are the challenges that we're actually currently facing, and what are the questions that we should be asking ourselves in order to think differently about the solutions and what we're doing. So I think all of those skills are still going to be needed. Who's buying the work? I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I would like to assume that public and civil society, and I think there's probably going to be a growth in civil society, hopefully wanting to pay for that work. I think if we think about the third sector being the kind of catch-all between the public sector kind of failure and private sector, it not being about profit, you've got this third sector, civil society, which is currently worth about 900 billion, I think, in philanthropic money that is existing in that space. I think more of that's going to be deployed to kind of work in some of the critical challenges that we see, and the different transitions that are going to be needed as well. Yeah.
So maybe let's go next to Liz, and you mentioned, in a sense, the uptake of this, let's call it a sort of an innovation or problem-solving methodology. Like, so in that scenario, the third film, we had a national design service, right? Like the National Health Service, a national design service, an institutionalized form. But Liz, you at the moment navigate between your material futures practice, your materials design practice, making work for exhibitions, for example, and the work you do in humanitarian contexts. So that's your current setup. How do you think you might be navigating your skills and your possibilities in 2040, and where do you see the value of that work?
Yeah, I think in 2040, I hope to become like a professional world builder, someone who can tangibly build a world. I remember when I would tell my classmates who I did my bachelor's degree with, like, Liz, the jump between law, international law, humanitarian law, into like design seems so redundant. It seems so backward. And I said to them, actually what these two have in common is that they know how to build worlds. We build the world with the law. We have rules and set, that is the boundaries that we exist in. And then you have those who make, and they build everything else that we live in. And so I think in terms of my practice and the future of design, what is going to happen for me, what I believe will happen, it will be corrupted, as in the language of design will be taken into institutions that are traditional institutions working in the development sector, public sector, to make it trendy, to just, you dilute the word so it becomes, I'm just problem solving, but you lose the power of the fact that we can build worlds with design, the material world, and also the worlds that we make with our words and policy and laws. So I think there has to be this bridge that will be created, and those who do it really well will actually make really great change. And I think that the practice that you would have in institutions, whether it's like private institutions, like for example, or public institutions like going to CSM or stuff that you learn privately, is how you become so proficient in being that person who can bridge those two things and control those two things. That's how powerful it is. Can I build the world? Can I do it top down, changing policy, legislation? Can I build it bottom up, building buildings, roads, those things?
So we've got design as sort of problem-solving and innovation and world-building. Maybe, Clare, connecting to what you were saying before with the climate context that you were highlighting, and maybe, do you believe that forms of design will still be valued and valuable in 2040? Do you see a place for them? And what do you think they're doing? What do you think they're achieving?
Well, I think more people have to be designers in a bit more of a sort of, Cuba kind of way, like making shit out of old shit because you can't get new shit. And And in that way, it's going to be very democratizing, isn't it? Because people are going to have to learn to fix things and make things out of what they've got and share skills and try to work out how to make the best of going through a long, slow, very tragic, intentionally planned future that no one wanted. And so I think for me, it feels like, design is really important for me as a lens, because like a lot of people on this panel are talking about how you design ways of interacting with each other, or how you design things that empower people, or how you design things that unite people or help people see critical, important things that they need to understand about the world around them collectively in order to do something about their shared problems. So I don't think that the notion of design as we see it is going to be gone, but I do think that what's interesting about your question, which says what is kind of the design industry, or what does professional design, or what does, I fucking hope it doesn't exist the way it does now, because we're talking about design as in design that does good things, and most people leave this kind of an institution and go and work for capital and do something they don't like to make themselves money to pay rent to someone they don't like, to sell shit they don't believe in, and climb up a ladder, which gets them to the point in their career where people my age, who I went to fashion school with, are at the top of their game, who are far more successful than me, think that their job's totally pointless and they don't know what the fuck to do about it. Because it actually is pointless if you get to the top of Dior, or if you get to the top of Fendi, and you're really rich, and you schmooze around with people who are horrible, and you make stuff out of, brand new materials to help rich people show off. Most designers aren't interested in that, actually. Working on design for status is bullshit. Working on design for commercials is really boring and awful, and makes you feel like shit. So no, I think design needs to basically be either, transformed or get out of the way, because there's that phrase, isn't there, someone, I don't know who said it, the designers do the devil's work for capitalism. It's without designers, you don't have a lot of the problems that we have now, because basically good, meaning, nice, creative people have given up their values and they work for other people's values that they hate, and they do it to get by in a world that is horrible and not doing the things that they want to do. So for me, the whole thing needs reframing, because design is important, and ordinary people who aren't designers can become designers, and it's not an elite practice when you've got problems to solve or ways of interacting with each other to learn about. I design the way that people come together in a group in a way which is much inspired by therapeutic practice. They don't call themselves designers, they call themselves therapists. And we're going to need tons of that, like what Liz was saying. So I think the lines will need to be blurred quite a lot. And I think we have to be quite clear with the design industry as it is now, that it's not all right. And if people carry on working in it in the way that they are, then they're just adding to the problem, basically. They're adding to the 500 million tweets a day, aren't they? They're creating AI so that they don't even have to design them themselves. They design the way it gets designed, and then the bot designs it, and then you can make 1,000 times more of it. Well, that's just shit too, right? Because we actually like design and the process of design, and that has to be done by a person. So, all of it, I think the lines need to be sort of moved around and blurred much for us to be able to imagine how we talk about this in a way which actually helps people understand that, world building is a thing that people do when they've not got much and they make the best out of it in their community. World building is a thing that everyone's sort of engaged in. And so, for me, it's important to be critical about that. And I think, what at the moment feels like a kind of design field, if you like, which sort of wants to stay attached to the way things are when really everybody knows that it's not going to stay the same, is what can people do that's helpful? And, one of the problems that I sort of mentioned at the beginning about the information sphere and people finding it very difficult to understand the world around them, and not having enough collateral in political processes or community processes, whatever it is that we're doing collectively to try and work out what the hell we should do. Creative people are really helpful with that. And, perhaps that looks like having more sort of state-owned creative capacity that's available to people to use for the things that they need it for. Perhaps it looks like some other kind of arrangement that distributes the confidence and the creativity back down to the ground, because, you know, the education system really beats a lot of creativity out of people. And then you have these people who've grown up and go, oh, you're creative, Claire, I'm really not. I'm like, bullshit. You were once. Like, what's happened to you? You know what I mean? So I think it's a much more sort of looking across education and how we meet our basic needs and how we organise society and how we treat one another and how we like heal and like soothe one another through the difficulties that are coming ahead. Like, that's a creative project, and it's not a project for designers, it's a project for designers to get off their high horse and collaborate with loads of ordinary people about and loads of other disciplines about, because there's lots needed in terms of the ingredients.
If you could pass the mic to Kieran, thank you. I'm hearing still a belief in the creative making, world building, but the relating, rooting it in relating. And I just want to hear from Kieran about, from your position, you started off by talking about policy design as the place to be needed to do, the policies need to be made differently. What do you think that looks like in 2040? If you follow that trajectory, the sort of work that you're doing now?
Well, it's interesting when you say what value are you providing, or what, you know, who's going to be paying for that. So the bit about policy design for me is creating kind of measurability and accountability in what the government is doing. So you're actually starting to identify new forms of value. For instance, if we map back to the whole kind of, you know, we all know that the capitalist model, some may disagree, is, you know, an extraction model which eventually just drives us off the edge of a cliff. But everybody's bought into it as a society. That's my perception. So that only has one version of value. You know, for instance, we could stop using plastics today. We could regulate against it, but that would destroy supply chains, lose a lot of people a lot of money. But then you're valuing money over human life. You know, it's that simple. So when I think about what will I be doing, it's essentially establishing new forms of value. So, you know, what is the impact? What is the outcome? Because you're talking about, Claire, kind of we're creating too much stuff. If you think about the natural world, there is no waste. Everything is absorbed, everything's regenerative. But we live on a natural world, so if we create waste, we're going to screw ourselves, right? So there is no model in the natural world where there is any waste or debt, and that's what capitalism is based on. So identifying new forms of value where everything is measured by that. So what is the public benefit? What is the well-being outcome? What is the public health benefit? What is the, you know, the happiness? How can you free up more time for people rather than employers thinking about, is a 4-day week going to lower productivity, therefore we create less stuff and, oh no, we make less money? How about thinking about, well, if we create a 4-day week or a 3-day week, we have a new version of value that we've created, which is public happiness, which allows people to enjoy life, which is what we're all here for, and not create stuff. You know, the kind of fully automated luxury communism idea that Aaron Bastani of Novara Media came up with is essentially like, we can automate all version of productivity. And ultimately, if we can design regenerative models that you're talking about, Claire, that is a new version of kind of trading. It's not capitalism. Everybody thinks capitalism is, you know, exchanging stuff, but it's not. It's exchanging this fabricated idea of money for stuff. If you take money out of it, you can still exchange things, and we have the means of production to look after everybody and everything. Just the willpower and the decision-making to do it is not there. It's very clear we can solve all the world's problems. We have the technology, we have the ability to, but if someone says it's an affordability question, we can't afford that. That's bizarre to me. We can't afford to save these people, but money's just made up, right? So identifying new forms of value will be essentially the future part of design for me, because I'm talking about strategic design rather than delivering stuff.
Yeah. So new forms of value, doing things differently, going beyond the current frames we have with the kind of capitalism that exists and the current political choices, which are based on, you know, achieving GDP growth. Let's stay with this theme of design and like the varying ways that this thing called design might actually be useful for a flourishing society, a flourishing, more equitable society that lives within planetary boundaries. If you're trying to work with someone or collaborate with someone in 2040, what will you be looking for, right? We're sort of surfacing values and we're surfacing politics in this panel. So if you're choosing to work with someone, whether you're employing them, you have a team, for example, or you're choosing which organisations to work with, what are you looking for? What skills, what values, what behaviours? Maybe we start with Liz at the end. So if you're working with someone in 2040, what are you looking to work with and why?
I think I will be looking to work with someone who is ambidextrous and a polyglot, someone who can speak multiple languages, but also translate multiple languages, the physical and just the languages that we speak. So someone who's a non-linear thinker. That is someone I would love to have on my team, someone who can see the picture in ways that I couldn't see the picture, can reference things from different places. And I think designers are really, really good at that, especially if someone who's doing it and who's doing it well. And then I also want people who are just professional in one thing. I want to be working with the carpenter who understands wood. I want to be working with the person who understands weaving. And then my job as a facilitator would be able to extract different knowledge and push forward a particular agenda that we're working at.
So in 2040, do you have a team? Do you have an organisation?
I hope so. I think that the problem with the international development sector, it's really donor-based. The system is very archaic. Our team, I'm consulting, but the team that I'm a part of, we're all like on the brink of like, we need to raise more money to be able to do the bare minimum. And so if we have a financial system, we redesign the system that it works to benefits like positive work, efficient positive work, then I think that I would be able to have a team. If not, it would be something that I will become the person I'm looking for.
So that means you might have to have more skills in the fundraising side if it's still a donor model in humanitarian.
That is something that is like my upscaling right now, is actually how do you raise money? And I didn't go to school for that. And in my culture, I was never taught to ask for money. It was feedback that my coach gave me this morning. Is that, Liz, you have to ask. It's my job to ask, but I have not been trained to ask. So you have to learn these skills. Like, and one thing that I want to also add is like just being proficient with soft skills. Like just being a nice person takes you so far, because there's some skills you can't learn. Like you can learn everything about finance, you can read every book about how to raise money, but people are gonna like you. The philanthropist is gonna trust you with that money, and that's basically the soft skills. And so there's some things that we can't learn in schools, but there's a lot of learning to do. There's a lot of like people skill is the hardest skill. Like learning to work with people in very hard situations is the hardest skill. Learning to negotiate with the person who's trying to kill all these children that I'm working with is the hardest skill. And just a quick anecdote, just to prove the point. I was working abroad, and I met the CEO of this Swiss NGO, and he's just like the coolest Italian guy I've ever met in my life. Like just bad, yeah. And when I asked him, like, how did you get into the job? He said, I did it with a savior complex. But when a guy from a terrorist organization came to try and kill him 5 times, he understood that this job is about people. And it's the people skills will take you so far. And those are, I hope that we can learn. And when I hear about Clare speaking about just stuff that we learn in CSM in different departments, you miss those skills. And so you need to learn those skills.
Julian, so what kind of people do you want in your team in the future? What sort of skills will they need? What skills will you need?
Yeah. So at the heart of the work we do, it is about addressing systemic issues. So I'm really keen to have people in the team that think systemically and is willing to cross different boundaries and silos between industries, teams, people. So someone who's willing to kind of go across the system and connect the dots. That's not just about just being fixated on one thing, but actually recognizing that there's dialogue to be had, connections to be made, value to be created. So someone who can move across the system, but then ultimately is asking that question, what's behind this? And actually, what's at the core of these issues that we can begin to address? So not surface level, but really trying to get to the core and having those conversations quite boldly about that. So I think there's something about being quite bold and brave. And I've seen that in my team, but also it's something I think I have to practice myself, and we're going to have to continue to practice where you're able to speak up about the things that you see or the things that you recognise are not being accounted for in that particular process or in that particular project. Recently, I've been thinking lots about, in the work that we do when we're creating new services or creating new propositions to bring new solutions, we've been wanting to work a lot more with people who understand financial modelling and economists, people who are able to really understand, going back to that question of value, like once we create these things, what's the actual value that we are going to be generating? And that general value doesn't need to just be monetary, but actually, can we understand the value of those things? And that speaks to this idea of, we can prototype and we can make things real, but those that are really wanting to articulate what this thing will actually be and do, and actually how it will move in the world feels really important. And then finally, it's interesting, I had to work with people who have joy and optimism as well. The work is hard, right? When you're working on critical issues and problems, it takes a lot. You're thinking quite deeply about these things. Your role can be immersed in that, but actually, those that are able to find that optimism and that joy and the ability to join in solving problems together and moving the dial forward, even if it's not always completely to the end, feels really important. Yeah.
So thank you for those suggestions, although I'm not hearing a lot of optimism in this panel so far this evening. Claire, maybe because you've emphasised relationality, people, working with people, the face-to-face, the embodied, maybe you could reflect on what kinds of collaborations you imagine you would be having in 2040, and with who, and what sort of skills are needed for that?
Well, it depends what happens, but I think, it's highly unlikely that we're going to experience something that is kind of predictable from here. So when you're sort of imagining the future in terms of, is it going to be a tech dystopia where two people own everyone's data and everyone else is like, on the Matrix or something? Or is it going to be some sort of like utopian, everyone makes a better world together because we all fell in love with like Kate Raworth's donut economics and we decided the economic system was shit, so we just made it better and then everyone was healthier and better and more well and more kind to each other. It's like none of the options that you can sort of follow like a pathway towards seem very viable, and that makes it very difficult for me to be asked a question like that, or all the questions that you're asking us this evening, really, because it feels so fraught with like impossibility in terms of pinning stuff down. I mean, one of the things that's on my mind about what is likely to come when you have a massive breakdown of multiple systems at multiple times is that people start to experience these kinds of compound impacts, or like what people call cascade impacts of climate breakdown, where one thing makes another thing worse. They become clearly interrelating and clearly self-perpetuating. That's already happening, by the way, so we're already there. It just hasn't really like smacked us around the chops that hard in Britain yet. But it is already doing it to people in elsewhere in the world if you pay attention to it. And you can tell how much that's going to get quicker by watching the predictions go, like a concertina from 15 years ago, we'll have an Arctic till 2100, to now when it would be hard to find an expert who thinks we'll have a solid Arctic intact by the end of this decade. So that hastening of time where it squeezes nearer and nearer and nearer all the projections, I think personally, it's very difficult to see how my lifetime won't see like some kind of an immense revolution that will take place, because the systems that keep things in place how they are now will break, and because people will be pissed off and either will get something worse or people will work hard to make something better. So let's say like the good thing happens for the sake of argument, and we don't just get collapse and spiraling breakdown and like world fascism, which is where we're headed in my view. And let's imagine that we go the other way and we have a breakdown and people go, shit, there's an opportunity. So the elites are on the back foot, the systems are all broke. Now we actually can design something different, because actually all the time I've been working since I left art school, I was saying, how can I fix the system? How can I change things? And the opportunities haven't really been there. So we did a decent sort of effort in XR to try and do an embodied shock to the system to make it possible to make the conditions ripe for change. But we are going to live, I think, through the conditions for change, because shit's going to go down. And so if that's true, my body, my embodied work and my relational work and that kind of stuff is going to, in some ways, is going to have to be like massively built on networks of trust, and massively built on networks of people agreeing to live by a set of values that replace the sort of the sort of imperial importance of money, which like has to be brought down a peg or two, right? Because it's basically anything is fine if you're doing it to get paid. And I experience this all the time in my work. People are like, oh, but you should prioritize that because it's paying you. And when you don't do that, when you work in a social movement where you live off like hardly any money, but you just do things that you think are helpful every day and you're piss poor, you actually don't prioritize money. It's a liberation. And then you can do other things which like fulfill your own life. So in a way, I think, maybe we'll be still working on this project to like reorientate ourselves around a new set of values. And David Graeber, who was we were very lucky to meet through Extinction Rebellion just before he died, was talking about these twin values that you could replace. Care and freedom could be values that could replace production and consumption. And we've been kicking the tires of this for like 2 years now as like a collective of us who do creative work together. And actually, it works on so many levels that if you create better systems of care, everyone has more freedom. If you give people more freedom, they can care more. They can care more for each other. They can care more about things. All of it could become a sort of self-propelling dynamic. And so I think if anything good happens, my work will be with people who agree that we have to form a new relationship with a new set of values in order to have anything steady or supportive about our society, because the alternative seems to me like we leave the existing assumed thing in place, which is production, consumption, productivity, efficiency, and all of it is heading to somewhere very, very frightening, because it feels like there's no off-ramp until there is, because things are going to go crack, and there's going to be some off-ramps soon that are much more major disruption than anything that I could do by encouraging like 10,000 people to sit in the road all at once. Because quite honestly, we've seen the sort of limitations of the civil resistance methodologies we're using, and they historically, if you even think they can work now, have taken like decades and generations, and we don't have that time because every day at the moment we're just moving further into overshoot rather than having any time to play with. So, like you opened with the sort of, parts per million statement, it's so important for people to situate themselves around those facts at the same time as we're dealing with the realities of our relational meetings, with our encounters with each other and how we build out our networks. So I honestly think that probably I'll still be doing something similar in terms of embodied relational work, but it definitely from here on has a view to reconstitute or help us to show by the way that we do things together how we intend to reconstitute the sort of nature of our societies and the values that get to hold like the top ranking in the way that we like make decisions and decide how we design everything together.
Thank you. Kieran, so again, this question about the nature of choices to collaborate with, who are you collaborating with, why are you collaborating with them, and what skills are required for some future worlds in 2040?
So going back to the skills question, I'm going to riff on some of what everybody said, to be honest. Resilience, just because of the kind of challenges that you're coming up against, definitely resilience, adaptability, but empathy probably being the main one, because if you do want to create mass behavior change, whether it's in the way that government works or policy is made, or whether it's people adapting, new vaccines, etc., you have to build that element of trust. And the only way you can do that is to have like deep empathy. So all of the work we do, where our work is based on user research, ethnography. I talked about kind of uplands farmers and the effect of new synthetic types of protein. Well, you have to then go and spend time with uplands farmers and understand what are the things that they fear, what are the challenges that they face, down to current farming today, post-Brexit, the whole land management policy changed and the way that people receive money for farming. Now, we all know that farming as a means of production to produce protein doesn't work, even if it's kind of small organic farms. It just can't sustain the population. So how do farmers, for instance, transition into just caretakers and storytellers of the land? Why would they want to? Because right now they just need to access money so they don't fall into poverty. And that, like you go to user research with farmers, these are all people who are many of them verging on, suicidal because they don't know how to provide for the families, and they certainly don't know how to change instantly to a new kind of be sustainable, be caretakers. It's all well and good me saying that. That's just theoretical. So unless you go and understand these people, you've got farmers with shotguns who are on the brink. It's you have to be very resilient, and you have to really deeply empathise with those problems to go, okay, what is actually a sensible solution to this? Working on things like carbon audits. So, DEFRA has sustainability goals, but actually, and they go, right, well, if you have the metrics perhaps they want to work to, it's like, well, we need to audit a certain number of farms, we need to understand. Well, that's not the outcome for the farmer, is it? The farmer just needs to know how to be more efficient and have an economically viable living. So how can you create the policy in the carbon audit to benefit the farmer, not so departments can tick some kind of, perhaps, maybe you shouldn't say this, but vanity metrics, in terms of like how they are affecting change when, realistically they may not be. So yeah, empathy and resilience are probably the two key things, I think, for people I want to work with.
So at the beginning, I talked about 16 years ago, 2008, just to sort of anchor the discussion in something that we were all alive then, although we don't necessarily share experience at all. So can I invite you to look back to 2008? What do you remember noticing or thinking or paying attention to at the time, which has come to pass? And what do you remember noticing or thinking which has not come to pass? And I'm going to start. I'll start with you, Claire.
Well, it's quite a good question for me, because in 2008, I around that time, I was working in sustainable fashion, trying to run a brand with a friend, upcycled women's wear, yada yada, thinking, things are very, very bad in terms of the fashion industry. I'm trying to work out how you do something helpful with that, and I'm trying to do it by having binned off the commercial sector because it was shit, and moving into working in a sort of startup that can do things in a good way, in whatever way you feel like. And that, was with a view to sort of try and systemically show that something else is possible, particularly with like post-consumer and post-industrial waste. And then I think go forwards from there, and I started a project just before like Trump, basically, and Brexit with a friend of mine, Miles, which was called Body Politic. And for me, that was a very big shift in my work, which had gone from, thinking of working in fashion to thinking of working on product design, starting a cycle wear brand and thinking about making products that sort of facilitate a woman's lifestyle on a bike in a city to look good, and then going to this project called Body Politic, which was really about using things that existed already in the world, like a denim jacket that was previously a prison uniform, and turning that into something that was a vehicle for messaging that you would put on your body, on the understanding that you don't have resources and all you've got is your body. And actually, if you want to start conversations, perhaps a good way to do that is like that. and then thinking, well, the world feels like it's not right and I can't put my finger on it, but it's very bad, it's going in the wrong direction, and we're definitely going to have to protest loads. Otherwise, you know, all of this stuff's going to carry on going in the direction it's going. So we need to think about how we embody what we believe in, and we need to make protests that look so beautiful and sexy and great and exciting that people will want to join them before they even know what you're there for. Because, you know, a lot of capital creates like the spectacle and the sort of, you know, oh wow, that people go, what is that? I want that. And they don't actually want the thing they end up with. They want like the lifestyle, or they want the sort of pretense of that experience of themselves, of what they might be if they had like the whole lifestyle in that Chanel advert, but actually all they can afford is the perfume or the lipstick or the this or the that. Well, actually we thought, you know, we want to create an aesthetic and a feeling around embodying like your better values and being part of something that stands up and says like, you know, this is going wrong, guys. Hey, like, let's pull together. And that's the sort of, you know, that's part of the journey for me that then goes towards like setting up the art department for Extinction Rebellion, and the wearable patches and the making print studios happen in the street whilst you've occupied it, and all of that creative work sort of falls out of my, I wouldn't say just like disillusionment with the idea that you can do like good green capitalism and change stuff, but also the sense that our problems are very much greater than like one really shitty industry, because it's a sort of bigger systemic problem that we have. And so it feels to me like I've been on quite an intentional journey when I look back from that point to now. And actually things are worse than I probably would have predicted. Like I said, the concertinaing of climate impacts on one front particular, but also like the politics is worse and like more rotten in the last 4 years than I could ever have predicted or made up. And that feels to me like it's interesting because it comes in conflict with my personal lived experience, which is that like I think I'm doing much better work now than I've ever done. And I feel like I'm in a better place, and I feel like I'm able to contribute in a better way now than I was back then, when I was still feeling around through like where the lines are blurred between disciplines, or where things are like self-starting an activism, or where things are campaigning, or where they're making something, where they're workshopping, where they're providing a service, where they're, you know, designing strategic messaging, where it's designing a strategy for on the ground, where it's designing a direct action, where it's designing the way that I would show up in a certain space. So it's kind of in a curious paradox for me, that like things are worse than I thought they would be, and I'm probably also conscious that as a result of that, I'm probably doing much better work than I would be if things were slightly less fucked.
Thank you for sharing that journey. Maybe you could pass the mic to Kieran, but I suppose part of that is getting older, right? Just maturing, being more mindful of some of the choices. But I suppose there's a sense in what you're saying about the attention that you're paying to the climate and ecological collapse, which is providing a focus. Kieran, maybe a same question for you then about 2008. What were you noticing? What were you paying attention to, and what's changed in that? You know, what's come to pass, what hasn't come to pass from what you understood then?
So I guess so I've been working in user-centered design. That's essentially the premise of everything I've been doing, whether it was service design, organizational design, learning and development design, and now kind of policy design and policy labs. The underlying thing is, you know, what's the purpose? Where's the evidence for what you're doing? What's the outcome, essentially? And then how do you just test and iterate and move towards that? And I'm sure a lot of people know design in this room, hopefully. But I guess what's frustrating is that back then, you know, we were making alternative reality games to get people to empathize with ActionAid and kind of the plight of refugees, trying to use, you know, journalists in this game and other points of reference to empathize and understand the journey of people, or just effectively applying that same methodology. And I do find that I'm still having the same conversations. So it goes back to this kind of frustration that I know that the technology exists to solve the world problems and the productivity problems. It's just a people game. It's a behavior change piece, because essentially people behave to whatever you call success. It's as simple as that. If you say success is to do your productivity, you'll get your money and then you'll succeed in life and you'll keep up with the Joneses, etc. If you change, going back to the whole values piece, if you change what we measure as success, people behave differently. It's that simple. And that's essentially what I feel like I've been saying for my entire career. But it's still having the same conversations, but almost at more and more senior points, whether it's government, whether it's in private companies. And that's massively frustrating. But I feel like that is the solution. But if it hasn't come to pass, then I start questioning it, because there are radical, I'm not a kind of utopian technologist, but there are radical things like quantum computing, where you talk about, a couple of people having all the data for people in the entire world. Quantum computing has the ability to break all security encoding in the world. It could completely make the capitalist model break down, because, for instance, you have, going on a bit of a technology rant, but you have like 14-digit hashing on crypto wallets. The whole point is you can't brute force. The longer the number is, the harder it is to brute force. It might take 1 million years. Quantum computing can do it like that. As soon as that becomes kind of, either it does become democratized, it's like, great, everybody's got all the access to everything in the world, and you have like complete chaos and anarchy. That could bring the breakdown that you're talking about, Claire, and then we start anew. Or it stays centralized in kind of, a couple of IBM and Microsoft and Google's power, and then they have access to all the information, all the knowledge, unlock literally all the money in the world. I mean, that technology exists. It's like that has the ability to complete both things. Whereas I was thinking design gets you towards a solution. So every now and then technology comes along that just blows all that shit up and goes, well, anything can happen.
There's this thread about, revolution versus, incremental innovation and radical innovations, revolution versus reform, which is, an ancient political argument, but it seems to be threaded into design. We're going to turn to questions from the audience in a short while, but I just want to pick up these questions from Julian and then Liz about 2008, what you were noticing, and what's happened and what hasn't happened from what you were noticing.
Yeah, so 2008, I was probably just finishing my first degree, my law degree, and I'm moving into the study of public policy. And as I mentioned before, I was very interested in how society works and levers for change. One of the things I noticed then was the fragility of community infrastructure, as in the networks, the communities, the local assets, the leaders. I noticed the lack of investment and the lack of recognition of their role in creating change. In doing a formal policy MA, recognising actually, change wasn't held just in the hands of civil servants and those that had gone to study it, but actually there was so much at a local level that needed strengthening, and it was an important infrastructure. I noticed and predicted that would weaken over time if that kept on getting the overflow of public failure and the failure that comes from a capitalist society. And that's come to pass. So that's something that I'm seeing daily when I engage with community organisations, community assets. Like there is a resilience, but it is eroding away of the individuals themselves in terms of so much of what they sacrifice and give in order to create and generate change at that level. And then the thing that I would have hoped to have moved on, and it hasn't moved on in a way, is the challenges around racial disparities and racism and the inequalities that exist within that. I was a lot more hopeful in my 20s and hoping that we were going to see policies and a real understanding of at least an exploration of how we could actually mitigate and really push against some of those deep and seated inequities, and we haven't, unfortunately.
The same question to you.
I was a child. I was 12. I was a child, but I understood fear. and terror. It was the kind of the wave of like the London bombings, and like I also really remember that I was afraid of the tube, and I grew up in a really like low income area, so I understood death at a really young age. We buried loads of people because of knife crime, and just the thing that I think about like is the BlackBerry phone. And the reason why I think about that a lot is because it doesn't exist right now. Like you won't find the model of what we have right now, but it was the reason why so many of my friends were stabbed, and it doesn't exist now. And that's the power of design. Like it can shift communities to find this as an asset, and it's not an asset because it doesn't exist now. And every single time I see his mum, I feel really sad because I was like, it was over a mobile phone. This phone doesn't exist now. But that is how powerful consumerism and design can be. And so I wasn't in practice, although I went to a art and design secondary school, which is really crazy. You know, like how things kind of become to be. But I just remember just the material things. You remember stuff and how you associate with memories. Like I remember my first Oyster card, and I remember being afraid of the tube. Like you have these memories associated with designed objects, and how powerful they are and how they're used. I think the memory I have. And in terms of like, is it better? Of course. For me, right now, in my experience with London, is so much better for what I grew up with. One, because I have agency to change. I can kind of advocate for myself and advocate for my community. And there were people who were advocating for us. Now you understand how the game works. I think that I understand the game. I understand how to speak to the right people. I understand how to lobby well. I understand how to design products and services really well for a desired outcome. So, yeah, in that capacity, that was my 2008 to now.
Thank you. All right, we are going to just take a couple of questions. We don't have a lot of time. When you speak, please wait for the microphone. So I saw you first, Ashley. Who's Ashley? And I will cast my eye over. Okay, you were second and then third. Okay, go ahead.
Really interesting perspectives. Thank you for sharing. One thing you notice is through research and some of the things that you've said, a lot of the work tends to be around third sector, public sector. Do you envision a future where we're able to hold corporations and those with more resources who seem to use these resources to kind of almost dictate our future to account? Do you ever think there is a possibility of that? Where, for example, rather than, you mentioned doing a lot of the work, but you have to fundraise a lot, but you're doing the work that means something for society, whereas we have other corporations that have all the resources that are hoarding them. Do you ever see a future where we kind of take it into our hands to try and redistribute that?
Okay, I think we all heard the question. Who would like to go first? Claire?
Yeah, because I think there's going to be a revolution, and I think that the people who caused this mess are going to be at some point held to account by people who are too young to be able to do that right now. And actually, that's one of the things that I think Extinction Rebellion did extremely well, was build intergenerational solidarity. I remember sitting on a bridge with a group of old OAPs, got tons of old people in the UK climate movement. People think it's a young movement. It's fucking not here. It's one of the people who've retired. And they stepped forwards in front of all the young people and formed a line on the front line where the police were making arrests and said, it's only right if we go first, because it's our generation who's done this, and we should take responsibility before you have to. And they intentionally made that move. What frightens me, and you can see it in Greta when she said, how fucking dare you, you know, people are going to want some accountability, people are going to be desperate for justice, is that the need to encourage people to seek a form of justice, but also the need to try and make sure that that happens in a way which actually functions rather than causes breakdown. Because for me, it's very clear, there's a lot of people in the climate space right now who are saying, you know, from Andreas Malm's book, saying like, perhaps we should be blowing up infrastructure and destroying the property of those corporations, right through to people who are saying the people in charge of these companies have got names and addresses, right? There are individual people who lead these companies now, and everyone knows, like Exxon knew, Shell knew, they all lied, they all hid it, they all covered it up. BP have just literally said, we take the mask off. We don't even have to lie anymore. We're just doubling down on fossil fuels. You fucking hate us, so why should we even lie? That's all we're going to do. We never were an energy company. We always were a fossil fuel company. We've never cared about the impact. And that's going to create the conditions for like more and more and more outrage. And so if the circumstances lead you towards a revolution, yes, some of those people are going to experience hopefully jail time because nobody wants to see the alternative outcome, which is what normally happens in a revolution.
So Clare, revolution, but other perspectives? Okay, where's the mic? Oh, sorry.
One of the reasons why I was trained in international humanitarian law, and it's such a, and I was trained in a really good institution, which pushed us all to be those people who work like at the ICJ. And one thing that was the reason why I couldn't continue, one, because I'm a terrible liar, and you have to be a really, really good liar to work in the legal field, because your words are the things that will convince. And I think whether you can keep those people in prison or not, the damage is done. It doesn't really, you have to find a different model for justice. And you have to have a model that is convincing, and you have to prove your point. And I think it's the same thing that Clare is saying. Her point comes out in revolution. Find the models that work for you. Whether those people are in jail, it don't matter. They got money, and they have resources. So find a justice model that works.
Unless anyone wants to comment, we'll hear two more questions and then we'll respond to both of those. So I saw this and then here. And then we'll, if we have time.
Yeah, I'd like to echo, thank you so much for this panel. It's been really insightful hearing all your perspectives, and it's definitely lit a fire under my own ass, so I appreciate that. So there's an argument to be made that in this day and age, there is sort of a lack of cognitive flexibility because of the way that we receive our media. There's an argument about filter bubbles and how social media has been so tailored to our own worldview that it's very hard to be able to see different perspectives and understand those perspectives in a way that we can then implement in meaningful ways. So, and I think that's very, very important for the future. It's part of critical thinking. It's how we grow and evolve as people. So are there any methods or techniques that you could see maybe moving forward that we could implement to be able to get people maybe to kind of be more open-minded and kind of consider these different perspectives and therefore be, come together as one?
So let's hold that question, and then if you could pass the mic to this person here who also has a question.
Okay, so thank you all. It was amazing to hear you all. I come from Peru. My context is completely different. I know that our countries have very similar problems and very different at the same time. I just wanted to ask, how do you deal with fear? Because I've seen so many marches and calls for justice in my country for different purposes. And the last few years, corruption has gone up like insanely, and people are dying on the streets. And the last march that we had last year, 60 people died, and there's no justice. Nobody's paying for that. So how do you deal with that fear that is growing collectively? Sorry, it's very emotional.
Thank you. Right, so we've got two questions. I'm trying to find a link to them, so let me see if I can go with this, but just while you gather your thoughts, right? So the first one, as I understood it, was about methods to break the bubbles, the social divisions, let's say, and then fear because of the real risk, right? With revolutions, people die. Well, people are dying already, right? But people are dying when they're protesting. So I suppose the question is, yeah, Liz, go ahead.
Can I just answer the question on fear? Because I was thinking about it today. And why I can be very positive with my job, although there's so many children and women dying, is because I have I'm very confident in my eschatological ideas. I'm so confident of how things will end. And it's a part of your choice of how things end. We can't, in future work, you can't predict the end, but you can predict your end. And you can be like, at the end of my life, I'm going to achieve X. And so you understand your end and you work backwards. So for example, for myself, I work in the field of humanitarian innovation for women and children specifically. I'm all about children and women. I have a quota, and it could be numbers, and for me, it's only one child. If one person comes back to me and says, Liz, what you did was helpful, I can be very confident with the work that I'm doing, and I can have no fear. So I think in your practice, whether it's like also adding advocacy, some people are better at advocacy, but that's why you build a network. There's some people who will do it better than you. But have your ideas of the end very solid, because you can work with a lot of confidence, and you will have fear, but your confidence, like you were saying, being brave and bold, the soft skills, understanding actually you can lament. There's actually understanding that you can be angry, and sometimes you can be frustrated, and it's okay to cry when you see these things. That actually points to what Kieran was saying, that you have a lot of empathy, and it's now taking what you have and just being like, fear is an object of proving that what I'm feeling is correct. Use it as a battery to charge you. Understand your goal at the end in your design practice and beyond, and actually just make it and just prove your point. And that's I think that is how you can live with a little bit more confidence. Fear will always be there, but that is a better perspective for that. Okay.
So breaking the bubbles, it doesn't feel like a very easy one. So it's very easy for me in the public sector to say, legislate, regulate, restrict. But that, like, the examples of that recently have not worked well at all. And again, because I feel like the policy and the legislation comes from a very assumptive perception of how you can just, top down control these things. But what is heartening is there's been, this is just anecdotal, recently seen some stories about, teenagers in schools who've been proof of concepts where they're not having mobile phones in classes, and they've actually the teenagers themselves are saying, I feel like I've been liberated, because people are getting so unhappy. It's again that kind of breaking point where you want access to everything, but we're all autonomous human beings, and people start to realize actually this is the source of why I'm feeling really sad and isolated. So I'm encouraged by the fact that it's coming from bottom up as opposed to top down. So I think little proof of concepts like that can show how it works, and I think then people talk to other people, teenagers especially. It doesn't mean you cut out all technology. You still have your communities. You're still chatting on Discord. You're still so that proliferates naturally, which is I think the right way to do that. From a technology perspective, I mean the guys that started Ethereum, which is most people know a bit of crypto. One of the co-founders tried to start a community like Facebook or MySpace from back in the day, where you could see where information originated from. Because the entire point of crypto or blockchain originally was a decentralization technology. It wasn't about money. In my perspective, it's actually about something that can bring down the whole system, because it wasn't about buying stuff. It was just about showing, where did something originate? What's the original piece of information? Where did it come from? What's the original source of production? So what's that kind of utopian future is, if everything, this is going down like tech will save us, but it's kind of, if everything was if you had this, productivity was just handled, everything's automated, everyone's free, there's no world of work. Having that transparency, if you just think about governance and decision making, when I was talking about design as a decision making framework, or law even, it's all if this, then that. If you can see transparency, so the underlying thing is transparency. You can say, we see where decisions originated from, who's accountable, who has made good use of the position of power, then you have the potential as a community or as a populace to take that power away from that person, because you have the transparency. What we have right now is a complete lack of transparency in how decisions are made, and it's by a very small group of people. So diversity in that. I've gone off into a bit of a tangent, but I think technology can help in some spaces, but more a kind of bottom-up piece. Because I would say education, but then where's the information coming from? It's very difficult to enforce that kind of thinking, critical thought on people.
Thank you. So I regret I can't take any more questions. We've kind of run out of time. But I'd like to thank you for being here and thinking through some of these things with us, even if you didn't get to ask a question yourself. Obviously, I'd like to thank our panelists. We've heard about care and freedom. We've heard about transparency and accountability. We've heard about co-creation and doing things differently and problem solving and working differently with people. We've heard about world making and fear. We've definitely heard about urgency and revolution. And in a sense, I'm left with a sense that there's an untapped potential for the things that we are group as something like design at the moment. There's untapped potential. But at the same time, some of the core practices also need to change. And since many of you are students, that's some of the work that you're going to be doing that we will learn from. So thank you for joining us here tonight. Thank you to our panelists, Kieran McBride, Clare, Farrell, Julian, Thompson, and Liz Ebengo, and to my colleagues for organising tonight's event. Thank you.